He was a millionaire, about to marry the most famous woman on social media, but just minutes before walking down the aisle, he vanished. A crash, a life turned upside down. And when he woke up, the first name he spoke wasn't the bride's. It was the beginning of a love story no one ever saw coming. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Let's dive into the story together. New York City glided past the tinted windows, its lights stretching like a silk ribbon along Fifth Avenue. The buildings shimmered in gold, reflecting off the jet-black limousine that moved like a whisper through the night. Inside the car, everything was quiet. Almost too quiet. Brian Belmont sat still, tall, composed, dressed in a custom Italian tuxedo that fit him like it had been sewn onto his skin. The Swiss watch on his wrist ticked with clinical precision, but his eyes were elsewhere, locked on the glossy cover of a wedding magazine resting in his hands. Their wedding photo. It was the perfect shot. Elizabeth, his fiancée, radiant and poised like a goddess. And him, smiling. The kind of smile that gets printed, reposted, admired. Over and over again. His phone buzzed. He didn't need to check the screen. Elizabeth's voice came through the speaker. Sharp, polished, and cold. "Brian, don't be late. This is the event of the year. Don't mess up the image layout." He said nothing. Just folded the magazine shut with a quiet crinkle that sounded suspiciously like a sigh. The passing streetlights brushed across his face. Handsome, composed. But his eyes, they gave him away. Eyes that hadn't rested in weeks. He leaned back into the leather seat. Somewhere between silence and motion, a single thought pressed down on him like weightless steel. Do I even want this? The question didn't need to be spoken. It just hung there, suspended between the life the world saw and the one he was actually living. The limousine turned out of the city, onto the winding mountain road. The headlights cut through the mist like stage lights before a performance. A sudden curve, a truck, a sharp turn of the wheel, tires screeched, wind tore through the glass, and in a blink, everything shattered. Brian Belmont was alive, technically. His heart still beat, steadily, thanks to pharmacology. His lungs moved, rhythmically, courtesy of a ventilator. His body, bruised but intact, lay flat on a pristine hospital bed surrounded by machines that hummed, blinked, and pulsed with sterile precision. He had survived the crash, but the man inside hadn't come back. Not yet. The doctors called it a medically induced coma, a temporary suspension, necessary to reduce brain swelling, to let the body rest, to keep hope alive, at least officially. Hope. That was the word echoing through hospital halls. Hope was for the doctors, for the nurses, for the quiet staff who passed his room and slowed their step. But hope had a harder time reaching the cameras outside. Because outside the hospital, the story had already taken on a life of its own. The news broke within minutes of the ambulance arriving. A millionaire heir. A glamorous wedding interrupted. An influencer fiancé waiting in designer heels. Click. Publish. Viral. When Elizabeth arrived at the hospital, there were no tears, only flashes. She stepped out of a matte black SUV like she was descending onto a red carpet, not onto the asphalt of the trauma ward's loading zone. Her heels were nude patent leather, expensive, impractical. Her gray silk dress clung perfectly, its folds falling just enough to suggest modesty, just enough to command attention. Oversized sunglasses swallowed half her face, concealing not just her eyes, but any visible evidence of distress. Her expression, as always, was curated, serious but not shaken. Her lips pursed just so. Her posture unbent. She walked through the hospital entrance like she owned the place. A brief wave to the camera crews. a slight nod to the security guard. But no questions, no conversations, no distractions. Inside the ICU, the lighting was harsher, less forgiving. Elizabeth paused outside the glass doors to Brian's room. She stared at the man lying motionless beneath the white sheet, tubes running from every angle, a soft whirring of machines standing in for the voice he could no longer use. For a moment, just a beat, she hesitated. But not for him. She was checking her reflection in the glass. Satisfied, she pushed the door open, stepped inside, and stood beside the bed. She didn't ask about his condition. She didn't sit. She didn't speak to him. She didn't touch him. Instead, she reached into her clutch, pulled out her phone, and opened the front camera. One photo, then two. Tilt head left, look down, now up. Angle the phone higher, always higher. She brushed a strand of hair off her shoulder, checked her lipstick with the phone's reverse view, then finally chose the best image. Her caption read, "Waiting for you, my love. Love always wins." Within seconds, it had over 87,000 likes. Within minutes, the comments poured in. "Stay strong, girl. This is what true love looks like. You're such an inspiration." She smiled faintly. Not for Brian, for the algorithm. The nurses, watching from behind their station, exchanged no words. They didn't need to. They had seen her kind before. She hadn't asked for an update. She hadn't said his name. She hadn't even looked at the monitors. But she had looked good. And that, in her world, was the same as being present. Elizabeth slipped her phone back into her clutch. She walked out as gracefully as she had entered, nodding slightly to the nurse on duty, though she didn't make eye contact. Behind her, Brian's machines continued their quiet, tireless labor. He remained still, unaware, unresponsive, but not unloved. At least, not by everyone. Because while Elizabeth's grief was viral, somewhere else in the hospital, a far quieter kind of presence was waiting. Not for a camera, not for praise, just for him. She was small, easy to overlook, the kind of woman people passed in a hallway without seeing. Lucy didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it that way. Every morning she pushed her cart down the long, fluorescent-lit corridors of the hospital, her shoes whispering against the linoleum floors. Her routine was simple, repetitive. Polish the metal rails, wipe the smudged windows, empty the bins. She rarely stopped unless something caught her eye, or someone. She had heard about the man in room 407. Everyone had. The millionaire who was supposed to get married that weekend. The crash. The coma. The cameras. But Lucy didn't watch the news. She didn't need to. One glance through the window was enough. He was still young. His face handsome but pale, framed by a tangle of wires and IV lines. Machines blinked steadily beside his bed. But it wasn't the money or the headlines that stirred something in her. It was the silence, the stillness of a life suspended. She stood there a moment longer than she should have, her gloved hand resting on the handle of the mop. Then she moved on. But she came back, the next day, and the day after that. At first, just a pause in front of the door. Then, eventually, she'd slip inside during her shift when the hallway was quiet. She never stayed long, just enough to straighten his blanket, or tuck in the edge of a sheet, or wipe a smudge off the bedside table. She didn't speak the first time, or the second. But on the third day, something made her whisper. "I heard you were supposed to get married," she said softly, arranging a fresh plastic water cup. "But I guess life doesn't always follow plans, does it?" There was no reply, only the rhythmic beeping from the monitor and the gentle sound of the oxygen machine. The next day she brought a flower, a tiny thing, a wild daisy she'd found outside the service entrance near the loading dock. She didn't have a vase, so she slipped it into a paper cup and placed it on the tray near his hand. "I used to pick these all the time back home," she said. "They grow everywhere, even in the cracks of the road." From then on, her visits became a quiet ritual. She would clean in the morning, and when no one was watching, slip inside. She never turned on the lights. She never touched the machines. But she left little things. Flowers, a folded paper crane, a story softly told. One day she sat down for just a minute. "I wanted to be a nurse once," she said, barely louder than a breath. "But things got complicated. Life got in the way." She looked at his face, still and unmoving. "I guess that sounds silly to you. You probably had everything. Money, plans. But I think sometimes, even the ones who have everything feel alone." She paused, not expecting a response, not needing one. "I don't know your name, not really. And you don't know mine. That's okay. I'm not here for that. I just didn't want you to be alone." And she meant it. Not as an act of charity, not out of sympathy, but something quieter, something stronger. She never took selfies, never posted a single word. She didn't tell her co-workers, or even the nurses. She didn't need recognition. Her presence was the kind that never asks to be noticed, only to be felt. She was the kind of person who watered a plant no one else remembered to care for, who picked up a torn corner of a bedsheet without being asked, who stayed just long enough to let silence know it wasn't empty. The night crept into the hospital like a slow tide, covering everything in stillness. Overhead, the fluorescent lights dimmed to half power, humming faintly above polished floors that no longer echoed with hurried footsteps. The wards were quieter now. Even the monitors seemed to beep softer after visiting hours ended, as if machines, too, respected sleep. Lucy walked the hallway with careful steps, her sneakers silent, her uniform sleeves rolled to the elbows. She didn't need to be there anymore. Her shift had ended an hour ago. But something had pulled her back. Something small, insistent, like a thread she couldn't stop following. Room 407. She stopped outside the door, like she always did, her eyes drifting over the glass panel. Inside, Brian Belmont remained unchanged, his body still beneath the hospital blanket, the gentle rise and fall of his chest barely visible, orchestrated by the ventilator at his side. She hesitated. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. She had no medical reason to be there. She wasn't family. She wasn't part of his care team. She was just the woman who emptied the trash and polished the rails. But she turned the knob anyway. The room was cool and faintly scented with antiseptic. A single lamp glowed in the corner, throwing long shadows across the floor and washing Brian's face in soft, gold-tinged light. The machines beeped rhythmically, his heartbeat tracked in green waves, his oxygen level blinking in blue. Lucy stepped closer, moving slowly, not wanting to disturb the air. She reached for the chair in the corner and pulled it up beside the bed. It creaked slightly as she sat down. She looked at him for a long time. There was something about the quiet in that room that made every little detail louder. The way his eyelashes lay against his cheeks, the faint flutter of his throat, the way one of his fingers rested slightly out of line with the others, like it had once tried to move but forgot how. She reached out and gently took his hand. It was cold, but not lifeless. Her thumb brushed over his knuckles, tracing the contours of skin that had once held power, signed deals, held champagne glasses. Now it just lay there, open, waiting. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to talk anyway." Her words were careful, shaped by the stillness around her. "I don't need you to answer, I need to say this." She looked down, watching the way their hands touched, Hers small and dark, his pale and still. I know I don't belong here, not really, not in your world, but every time I pass by this room, something keeps me coming back. Maybe it's because you look so alone. Maybe because I know what it's like to feel like no one sees you. Her throat tightened, but she kept speaking. If you're still in there, if some part of you is still fighting, I want you to know you're not alone. You're not forgotten. I remember you. And then, after a long pause, she closed her eyes and whispered, If you can hear me, just give me something. Anything. The silence stretched. The machines kept their rhythm. Then, something changed. It was subtle, barely perceptible. A soft blip on the monitor, a tiny spike. Lucy's eyes snapped open. She stared at the screen. The heart rate had fluttered. Just once. Then returned to normal. She looked down at their hands. And then, his finger moved. Just one finger, the smallest shift, the barest twitch, so faint that someone else might have missed it. But she didn't, because she had been watching with all her heart. Her breath caught. Her body went still, as if afraid to spook the moment. Her hands trembled. Her eyes filled with tears so fast she didn't feel them come. "Brian," she whispered. Just then, the door opened. A doctor stepped in, not noticing her shock. "You shouldn't really be in here this late," he said, already halfway to the monitors. He glanced at the screen, saw the flutter. "Spinal reflex," he muttered. "Happens sometimes. Doesn't mean anything." She looked at him, nodded politely, said nothing. The doctor adjusted a few dials, made a note on the chart, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut. Lucy turned back to Brian. Her expression hadn't changed. Her lips weren't smiling, but her eyes held something steady, fierce, quiet, and burning. He had moved. When she asked, when she held his hand, she didn't need proof. She had seen it. She had felt it. And even if no one else believed her, even if the world called it a reflex, she knew. She knew somewhere inside that still, silent body. He was trying. And now she would wait. Late afternoon light spilled across the hospital corridor like broken glass. It angled through the tall windows of the ICU, casting long, pale streaks along the floor. Room 407 was quiet, still, like it always was at that hour. Lucy was changing the sheets. She moved gently, precisely, every fold of the blanket smoothed with care. Her hands, though worn from long hours of labor, were tender as they worked around the unconscious man's frame. She bent over slightly, tucking in one last corner of the bedding. Behind her, the door opened. She heard the sharp click of heels before she turned. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, dressed in a sleek cream-colored coat, designer handbag resting on her wrist, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Her skin was flawless, her presence controlled, composed, curated. But the moment she took in the scene, Lucy at the bedside, her expression shifted. Her brows drew together. Her voice, when it came, was cool and crisp. "What are you doing in here?" Lucy straightened. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. "I'm just trying to help," she said quietly. Elizabeth let out a soft, mirthless laugh. One corner of her lip curled with disdain. "Help?" She stepped into the room, eyes narrowing. "He doesn't need pity from the cleaning staff." The air tightened. Lucy didn't answer. She just looked at Elizabeth, steady and calm, with a quiet dignity that somehow made the moment more unbearable. Not defiant, not confrontational, just human. Then, from behind them came a sound, soft, barely audible, a groan. They both turned. Brian, his eyelids fluttered, once, twice, then slowly they opened. It was not dramatic, No gasp, no sudden awakening, just a fragile blink against the dim light, a quiet emergence from the deep. His mouth moved, dry, struggling, and then words. "Don't," he paused, pulling a breath. "Don't talk to her like that." Elizabeth froze. Lucy didn't move. She didn't breathe. Brian's eyes were glassy, unfocused, but they found Lucy, like they were searching for something familiar, and finding it. One sentence. That was all, but it shattered everything. Elizabeth took a half-step back, her face blank, like someone had just exposed a secret she didn't know was visible. Lucy stood still. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Her heart pounded. But she said nothing. There was no need. Because in that one moment, in that one fragile voice, the curtain had been pulled back. Brian hadn't asked about the accident. He hadn't said her name. He had defended someone else. Lucy lowered her gaze and stepped away from the bed. "I'll give you two some privacy," she whispered, though her voice cracked slightly. She walked past Elizabeth, not looking up. The door clicked shut behind her, soft as breath. Inside, the silence that remained felt heavier, different. Because for the first time in weeks, Brian Belmont was awake, and he wasn't the same man he had been when he closed his eyes. Morning broke gently over the city, with a sky rinsed clean by the night's quiet rain. The hospital windows held the softness of dawn, pale gold, almost too delicate to touch. In room 407, the light filtered in slowly, brushing the walls with the hush of a new beginning. Brian opened his eyes, fully this time. Not the weak flutter from the day before, not a moment caught between dreams and machines, but a slow, grounded awakening. His vision blurred briefly, then steadied. The white ceiling above him held no answers, but the weight in his chest felt lighter, not gone, but changed. A nurse was by his side, adjusting the incline of the bed. She worked with practiced care, her movements efficient and warm. Brian's voice was hoarse when it came. "Her voice," he murmured. "The girl who talks at night. Where is she?" The nurse paused. She looked down at him, a gentle smile softening her face. "You mean Lucy?" He blinked. "She's not family," the nurse continued, "and she's definitely not your fiancé. But she came every day, sat here, talked to you, left flowers, like you were someone she knew." Brian didn't respond right away, but something in his chest shifted. Not pain, something deeper. Memory returned in pieces, not of the crash, not of the sirens, but of whispers. A story about her village, the sound of her laugh, soft and self-conscious, the brush of her hand adjusting his blanket. He looked out the window. The light was brighter now, but not harsh. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to hold on to that warmth before the day could take it. Later that afternoon, the door opened again. Elizabeth, flawless, dressed like she was attending a press event, not a wrinkle in sight. Her hair was styled in loose waves, her lips tinted with a gloss that caught the light. She carried herself like she expected a camera to be waiting just behind the curtain. She smiled when she saw him awake. "Brian," she breathed, "you're back. Thank God." She crossed the room quickly, leaned in, and kissed his forehead. Then, without asking, she pulled out her phone and angled it, just so. "Everyone's been asking. I just want them to know you're okay." Click. Another photo. Brian watched her, not with anger, not even disappointment, just distance, a quiet recognition. She sat beside him, scrolling through filters, still talking, still beautiful, still playing a role she didn't realize had ended. He turned his face toward the window. The sky had shifted again, light clouds moving slowly across a canvas of blue. She asked him questions. He gave short answers. Not unkind, not cold. Just simple. Honest. And when she finally paused, expecting something more, some declaration of love, a promise to pick up where they'd left off, he said nothing. There was no bitterness in him, no edge. The part of him that had clung to that life, the one of curated perfection, of matching outfits and magazine headlines, had quietly let go. Not with drama, not with rage, just clarity. She looked at him, waiting. He smiled. Polite. Gentle. But not the smile he used to give her. It was over. Not with a bang, but with peace. The hospital room was quiet. Not sterile, not hollow. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed. Not the storm itself, but the moment you realize it's over. Brian sat upright in bed, propped against a stack of pillows, wearing a plain white t-shirt. The machines around him still hummed, but their beeps no longer felt urgent. The sunlight through the window was softer now, the edge of late afternoon brushing across the tile floor like gold dust. The world outside kept moving, but something inside him had stopped chasing it. He heard the familiar click of high heels approaching down the corridor before he saw her. Elizabeth entered the room like a gust of cool air, elegant, composed, confident. She looked like someone who had just stepped off the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Sleek cream blouse, pale blush trousers, gold hoops that glinted in the sun. Her makeup flawless, hair freshly styled. Even her sadness seemed intentional. She smiled, bright and purposeful. "You look so much better," she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. But he turned slightly, so it landed on the air beside his jaw. Undeterred, she sat at the edge of his bed, crossed her legs, and set her phone on the table beside the flowers someone else had sent. She glanced down at it, then back at him with excitement bubbling just beneath her voice. "So I've been thinking," she began, already halfway through the plan. "We'll reschedule everything. But this time we go bigger. Italy, maybe, or Lake Como. Something intimate but still spectacular. I'll talk to the planners this week. People are going to want to see us come back from this. It'll be a story, Brian. Our story." She paused, waiting for his reaction. But Brian didn't speak. He didn't blink. He simply looked at her. And in that gaze, something was different. Not angry, not wounded, just quiet. She tilted her head, confused. "You're not saying anything." He breathed in slowly, the kind of breath that precedes a truth. Then, with calm clarity, he spoke. "Elizabeth." Her name didn't hold affection, or resentment, just recognition. "You're thinking about the wedding," he said softly. "And I'm just trying to remember how to live." She laughed once, light but tight. "Brian, we both need this. After everything—" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't interrupt her with force. He simply reached for his hand. The motion was deliberate, almost reverent. He touched the ring on his finger, turned it once, and pulled it free. No drama, no tension in his shoulders. Just release. He looked at it for a moment, as if acknowledging what it had meant. Then he set it on the bedside table. The tiny clink it made against the wood was the only sound in the room. Elizabeth stared at it, then at him. He met her gaze with complete stillness. "I need something real," he said. "Not something staged." The silence that followed was absolute. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She wasn't the begging type. And she knew, in the deep instinct that women like her developed to survive high society, that something had shifted in him she couldn't reverse. He wasn't leaving her. He had simply outgrown her. She stood slowly, smoothed the sleeve of her blouse, and picked up her handbag with a single, practiced movement. The air around her felt colder now, more distant. "Well," she said, voice clipped but even. "I hope you find what you're looking for." He nodded once. Nothing more. She turned toward the door, heels clicking against the tile, each step as composed as the woman taking it. But this time, there were no cameras outside, no curated captions, no filtered light, just a door that opened and then closed. Brian didn't watch her go. He didn't need to. Instead, he leaned back against the pillows, his eyes fixed on the window. The sunlight had shifted, warmer now, stretching toward evening. There was no grand gesture in the air, no declaration of freedom. Only space, and in that space was peace. For the first time in years, he felt it settle inside him. This wasn't escape, it was return, to himself. The hospital was no longer a maze to Brian. He knew its sounds now, how the nurses' shoes tapped differently on each hallway tile, how the elevator always let out a faint sigh before the doors opened, how the air smelled like lemon disinfectant, and something older, something that clung to life after sickness. But today, he wasn't wandering the halls out of habit. He was searching. Not because he owed her anything, not because he had questions, but because something in him couldn't let the silence between them stay unspoken. He needed to find her. It took longer than he expected. The janitorial wing wasn't on any of the patient directories. It wasn't announced through overhead speakers. It was behind the pharmacy, past a service corridor where nurses rarely lingered. The hallway narrowed there. The lights dimmed. The voices faded. That's where he found her. Lucy was bent over a folding table in a supply room, stacking freshly laundered towels. Her back was to him, and she moved slowly, precisely, corner to corner, fold by fold. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet focus to her work, like she was smoothing out more than just cloth. She didn't see him at first. Brian stood in the doorway, just watching. There was no orchestra swelling, no dramatic music, just the soft hum of an old vent and the quiet rustle of cotton. And in that quiet, something caught in his chest. He cleared his throat. She didn't startle. She didn't gasp. She just paused, her hands freezing mid-fold, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment long before he arrived. He took a slow step forward. "Why didn't you come back?" His voice wasn't accusing. It wasn't even hurt. It was tired. Honest. Still, she didn't turn to face him. She finished folding the towel in her hands and placed it neatly on the stack. "I didn't want to cause trouble," she said quietly, her voice steady but soft. "I just wanted you to live, even if you never remembered me." That sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Brian stepped closer. The air shifted between them, closing the space that had once felt like miles. He didn't ask another question. He didn't demand anything from her. Instead, gently, he reached out and took her hand. It was calloused, slightly cold. But it was real. His fingers wrapped around hers, not tightly, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty. As if he needed her to know, "I'm here now, I remember." He didn't look away when he said it. "You're the reason I came back." She finally turned. Her eyes found his, wide with disbelief, but not because she didn't believe his words, because she had never expected to hear them out loud. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of everything they hadn't said. Of every night she had sat by his bed whispering to a man who might never hear. Of every heartbeat that shifted when he began to stir. Of every glance that meant more than a sentence could carry. He didn't say he was sorry. She didn't ask why it took so long. There was no need. Some connections aren't built with declarations. They're built in rooms with soft lighting, in folded towels, in whispers meant for sleeping ears. She looked down at their hands. Then up again. And this time, she didn't let go. It had been several weeks since Brian left the hospital. He was still recovering, but with every day that passed, he moved through life with quieter intention. No more press releases, no more curated smiles. His world was smaller now, simpler, and, in many ways, finally his own. Lucy had visited the hotel a few times, nervously at first. She walked through the lobby like someone stepping into a place where they didn't belong, even though Brian had already told her otherwise. One afternoon, just before closing, he invited her to sit in the main lounge. The space was warm with amber lighting and hushed conversations, but the air between them was still. He didn't speak right away. He let her settle in. Then, calmly, he began. "There's an opening at the front of house," he said, watching her carefully. "Guest services manager. It's a good position. And you already have the grace, the patience, the instinct. I want you to have it." Lucy looked at him. Not surprised, not flattered. Just processing. He continued, "Not because of what you did for me. Not out of gratitude. But because you're exactly the kind of person I want this place to reflect." A pause. "I want you close," he added, softer now. "But not out of obligation. Because you've earned it." Her gaze didn't waver, and then, gently but firmly, she shook her head. "Brian, thank you. I'm honored. But I have to say no." His brow furrowed. "Not to the job," she clarified with a faint smile. "The job, I'd be proud to take. But the other thing, the scholarship, the nursing tuition you arranged." He blinked. He hadn't mentioned it, hadn't admitted it, had gone through a foundation, anonymously, but somehow she knew. "I want to do that part on my own," she said, voice calm but steady. "Because becoming a nurse is my dream, and I need to know I built that with my own hands." Brian looked at her for a long time, not with disappointment, with something closer to admiration. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "No strings, just the job, and the space to grow." She reached for her tea, took a small sip. "I've never wanted anyone to carry me," she said, "but it means something that you'd offer." Her voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. Not the kind that wounds, but the kind that holds firm, even in wind. And it was in that moment, right there in the flicker of downlights and the low hum of a hotel evening, that Brian saw her completely, not as someone who had saved him, but as someone he could walk beside. Lucy started the new role the following week. She didn't announce herself. She didn't tell anyone where she came from. But within days, the staff noticed the way guests lingered a little longer at the desk, the way problems seemed to ease when she was near, the calm in her presence, the quiet command in her kindness. And though she never asked again about the scholarship, though she never mentioned the anonymous donation that still quietly covered a portion of her tuition, Brian never said a word. Because this wasn't a fairy tale, it was something better. It was two people, building something that wasn't built on rescue, but on respect. It had been an unusually quiet night in the city. No sirens, no distant horns. Just a soft wind sweeping through the streets below, as if the world itself was catching its breath. Up on the rooftop of the Belmont Hotel, it was even quieter. The rooftop terrace, once used for celebrity galas and champagne-fueled press events, now stood humbly lit. Strings of warm, amber bulbs stretched from post to post, flickering gently like fireflies. There were no white tablecloths, no background violinists, just two folding chairs, an old teakwood bench, and the open sky. Lucy stood near the edge, leaning slightly against the stone railing, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the lines of the cool marble. She looked out across the city, not searching for anything in particular, just breathing, letting the night hold her for a moment. Her sweater, a soft gray blue, moved slightly in the breeze. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands brushing across her cheek. She wasn't wearing makeup, not more than a touch of lip balm, but she had never looked more present, more herself. The door to the rooftop clicked open behind her. Footsteps approached, measured, familiar. She turned around slowly. No dramatics, no wide-eyed gasp, just a quiet smile of someone who already knew who had come. Brian stood there, a few steps away, holding something small in his right hand. His left was tucked in his pocket, like it always was when he felt unsure. But this time, his gaze didn't waver. He had dressed simply. A dark button-down, sleeves rolled to the forearms, a bit of scruff on his face. He looked less like a hotel heir, and more like the man Lucy had seen alone in the hospital bed. Still healing, still searching, but finally awake. They didn't speak for a moment. Then Brian took a step forward. "You know," he said softly, his voice carrying just enough to reach her ears. "For most of my life, I thought love was something you performed, something you earned, by being impressive enough, perfect enough." Lucy tilted her head slightly, listening, not with curiosity but with care. She didn't move toward him. She waited. He looked out over the edge for a second before turning back to her. "But when I woke up," he said, "the first thing I remembered wasn't my house, or my job, or Elizabeth's voice. It was yours, that quiet, steady voice I heard in the dark. You didn't need anything from me. You didn't even think I could hear you." Brian paused. "And that's when I realized. Love isn't about being seen by the world. It's about being seen by one person exactly as you are." He exhaled. "I used to live for admiration," he admitted. "Now, I just want to be worthy of love, the kind you gave me when I couldn't give anything back." Then, slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. There was no flash, no crowd, no stage, just him. Bare knees against old tile. His heart open like it hadn't been in years. From his pocket, he pulled out a small ring box, wooden, handcrafted, a single, simple band inside. No diamond, no headline, just a promise. "Lucy," he said, his voice steady, even as emotion thickened his throat, "will you marry me?" He looked up at her, not pleading, not performing, just asking. Lucy stood still. Her eyes blinked slowly, filling, not with disbelief, but with the weight of something deep and long awaited. She didn't rush. Instead, she stepped toward him quietly, knelt down too, so they were eye to eye. She placed her hand gently on his cheek. "Only if this isn't about the hospital," she whispered. "Only if you're not still trying to repay something." Brian closed his eyes for a moment, let her hand warm his skin, then opened them again, calm and clear. "This is about the rest of my life," he said, "and how I want to live it. With you, not because you saved me, but because I don't want a single morning without hearing your voice." The stars above shimmered like a held breath. The wind carried nothing but the faint scent of jasmine from a nearby planter. And in that quiet moment, Lucy smiled. Not wide, not loud, but full. "You don't need to impress me," she said. "You never did." She took the ring and slid it onto her own finger, then leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered, barely audible. "I've been waiting for that question for a long, long time." They stayed like that for a while. Two people, wrapped not in spectacle but in peace. They didn't kiss right away. Instead, they just held hands under the stars. Two hearts, beating steady. No music, no camera flashes, no crowd, just love, real, unscripted, and deeply, quietly chosen. Years passed, but not in a blur. They passed slowly, intentionally, like the turning pages of a book you never wanted to rush. Lucy became a nurse. She wore her name tag with quiet pride, her posture straight, her presence calming. Her patients remembered her not because she said much, but because she listened, because she adjusted pillows like she was tucking in someone she loved, because she held hands without checking the clock. At the hospital, where once she had whispered to a man who lay unconscious, she was now called the one with the gentle eyes. Doctors trusted her. Patients asked for her. Families thanked her with trembling voices and tearful hugs. And yet, she remained the same. The same Lucy who folded towels with care, who left flowers in paper cups, who believed in hope before there was reason. Brian changed too. Not all at once, but little by little, the hotels still carried his name. But the purpose behind them had shifted. His board meetings now included terms like community partnerships, training programs, and second chances. He restructured the Belmont Hospitality Foundation to fund scholarships for immigrant students and single parents. He opened a program that helped former janitors become guest services professionals, not because it looked good on paper, but because he'd seen firsthand what the world overlooked when it didn't know where to look. In their home, a modest cottage nestled just beyond the city, there was no marble staircase, no concierge desk, no velvet ropes. There was a narrow bookshelf overflowing with cookbooks and poetry, a small breakfast nook where morning light poured in like honey, and on one wall, framed in glass, hung a single pressed wildflower. It wasn't remarkable to most eyes, just a fragile little thing, browned at the edges, carefully flattened between two pieces of linen paper. But to them, it was everything. Lucy had found it again not long after they moved in. The same flower she had picked and placed beside Brian's hospital bed. She remembered the moment as vividly as the sound of her own name. She had held it up one evening, turning it in the light, then carefully slid it into a handmade frame, and hung it in the hallway, right outside their bedroom. "Honey," she said, touching the glass gently. "That was the first time I gave you something without expecting anything back, and somehow it gave me everything in return." Brian had only smiled. He understood now. Some things are too big to explain with words. Their life was not glamorous, but it was filled. Weekends spent tending the little herb garden out back. Evenings reading on the porch. Mornings when Brian brought her coffee without being asked. There were no grand declarations, no magazine covers, just a man and a woman who had chosen each other quietly, and never stopped choosing. One late afternoon, as the sun slipped behind the trees, they sat together on a weathered bench in their garden. The air smelled of rosemary and sun-warmed soil. A soft wind rustled through the leaves. Brian took Lucy's hand, still calloused from years of work, still warm with kindness, and held it in silence. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because sometimes the most complete moments of a life well lived are the ones that require no narration, just presence, just peace, just knowing you've come home, and in that golden hush of day's end, with nothing left to prove, nothing left to chase, just the quiet of a love that had grown from small gestures into something enduring, they sat together, hearts still, hands clasped. Right place, right person, right time. And for once, the world didn't need to watch. It just needed to let them be. If you've made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you. Now I'd love to hear from you. On a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Drop your number in the comments, and tell me what moment touched you the most. Was it the quiet courage of Lucy placing that first wildflower? The proposal under the stars without any flash or spectacle? Or maybe just the peaceful ending when no words were needed at all? If this story moved you, even just a little, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use a little more love and light in their day. We'll be here, telling stories that matter, and I hope you'll be right here with us.